Love and loss. As adults, we've all experienced the grief and pain of losing someone important or dear to us. Even children have known those feelings through the passing of a grandparent or a beloved pet. Grieving takes many, many forms, some obvious, some not at all obvious. These feelings, though natural, are different for everyone, so they require different ways of approaching. But always, it takes compassion, sensitivity, and patience. As we age, while we experience more frequent losses, we also get better at processing our grief. Children, fortunately, have not had time to experience or to learn how to process these intense feelings. And so it's up to us, the adults, to help them when grief does come. I'm Michael Hunter. Stay with us as we explore the universal yet deeply personal feelings of loss and grief. Leah Bangle, welcome to My Healthy Mind. Thank you for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
Leah, you are a licensed social worker, a clinical coordinator for an organization called SandCastles, and you all work with children that, very important work, by the way, with children that are or have experienced the death of someone very close to them. And when I think about my own daughters, it has to be very difficult for somebody to go through that, and it's painful for me to even think about. So will you tell us a little bit about the work you do at SandCastles?
Yeah, so SandCastles is a grief support program for children ages 3 to 18 who have experienced a death in their life. So with SandCastles, we provide peer support groups, one-time family events, and also host a camp over the summer.
And you do advocacy work too, right?
Absolutely. So we find that our world isn't very grief-informed, and everybody at one point in their life is going to experience the death of a loved one. So it's important that we continue to provide that grief advocacy in the world, and whether that be in schools, you know, just at tabling events, it's important to continue that education of grief for not only adults but children, and becoming a more grief-informed society.
And that's a new term for me, grief-informed. So what does that mean if somebody hears that, grief-informed?
Every person grieves differently, and it's important knowing different ways to support them, you know, especially like, you know, with a young child, it could just be like spending quality time with them, you know, ensuring that it's a safe space for them to talk, or with an adult, maybe it's like providing a meal, just a listening ear. So it's important that, you know, as a society, we know how different cultures grieve, as well as how to support each other and our own families as well.
How did you get involved with SandCastles? What's your background?
Yeah, so I got involved with SandCastles after the death of my mom.
So that happened when you were 12. Is that something you're comfortable talking about?
It's certainly difficult to talk about, but you know, when my mom died, you know, prior to that, we were a normal family, you know, family of 4. I had, you know, me, my dad, sister, and mom. My mom did have multiple sclerosis, and with that, she struggled with, you know, depression. So there was a lot of responsibilities with that. There was things that I kind of took up as, you know, a young 10 or 11 or 12-year-old is, you know, helping with chores around the house, such as like laundry, and helping with meals, or helping my mom get dressed, stuff like that. When she did die by suicide, I was at my aunt's house that day. We had spent a lot of time at my aunt's house. You know, she would help my mom out so that she could get a break, being able to go to the doctor's appointments, or just taking care of what she needed to do to take care of herself. So we were over there that day, and you know, I didn't really, you know, think anything of it. My dad had sent me like an email that day saying that he had called my mom, but she didn't answer, but I just thought she was sleeping, because she did sleep quite a bit between, you know, the medication and being depressed. But as a kid, you don't really I didn't really know that my mom was depressed. I just thought she was sad from the multiple sclerosis, and, it affected her whole body. And so later that night, my dad had come over and said that Mommy went to heaven that day. And I was in shock. Like, I just kept thinking, like, it was a dream. Like, this isn't really happening. I couldn't even, like, fathom what had just happened. I mean, you're 12, so you don't have all the, I couldn't really just grasp what was happening. And it wasn't until, like, 2 weeks later that I had found out, like, the cause of death. We were on a camping trip, and it was, like, early in the morning, and I had asked my dad, well, how did Mom die? And he did share it was from suicide. And again, it was just surprising because I knew my mom was struggling. She had used, like, a walker or a cane and definitely relied on family support. But at the same time, I guess I didn't realize how bad it was. It was, shocking to hear that she had died from suicide.
And what was your processing time like to not get over it, but really get to a place where you were like, I think I'm okay?
Yeah, it definitely took some time. My mom died the summer when I was going into middle school. So that is a tough age already. And, so going into, junior high, middle school, I was with a bunch of new students, and it was really hard because, I had my core group of friends there, but at the same time, nobody really had known my story. And it could go either way, right? It could be good that nobody knew, and then at the same time, it was kind of lonely because I was like, nobody knows what just happened that summer. Going to SandCastles, I had the opportunity to be with other kids who understood. We talked about the losses, but we also talked about how are we getting through school, like all that stuff. I was also enrolled in therapy also. I think between the two, I had a lot of outlets to be able to talk about the death in my life. At home, it's not that my dad wasn't available. He was always available, would do, mental health check-ins, say, hey, Leah, how you feeling today? But sometimes it's hard to talk about, my mom with my dad because I can see in his eyes it's still hard for him to talk about too. So it's still good for me to have other outlets, whether that be SandCastles, individual counseling where I could work with a therapist on, specific goals, or even other like family members or friends. I still have friends that were around my mom, remember my mom, and, being able to talk about those stories. It's nice because that her memory is still alive, but it still hurts because I want her to be here, with me today.
You mentioned that you were given some tools earlier. Can you tell me about those tools a little bit more, what they were, how they work?
Yeah, so at SandCastles I did, different grief activities to kind of help me along the way. One of those activities is an All About Me book. So it kind of talked about, different things at the time, like maybe what my, favorite music was or favorite book was, but it also talked about memories of my mom. So it was talking about like what her favorite joke was, music, food, that type of stuff. It also talked about like some deep questions like what will I miss most, or what are the things that I disliked. And I can remember I wrote down I didn't like that my mom said that she was a bad mom. And I remember, she had said that because she, felt like she couldn't do a lot with her MS. And so I remember, specifically writing that down, writing down different memories. Like there was this one time at a graduation that there was a slip and slide. And although my mom was using a walker that day, she somehow managed to convince a bunch of my cousins to like pick her up and push her down the water slide. So she did not miss out on anything. She had still a lot of joy in her life despite having like a walker or a cane. Or, my mom just like singing to me as a baby. She sang Somewhere Over the Rainbow to me as a baby. And so, that song, I couldn't listen to it right away, but I I find, you know, a lot of peace in it now. And so just writing those things down. Also, I made a memory box. So I wrote a letter to her and decorated the box with her favorite colors and, you know, her favorite things. Yeah, on there is like little butterflies because after she passed, we saw a lot of butterflies. And so now every time I see a butterfly, I know that she's with me. And it seems like even on a bad day, they always appear. So I'm always happy when I see them.
Next time you need to see a doctor, don't go to a doctor. Call Team Wellness Online. With Team Wellness Online, you can see a doctor or a therapist without waiting, usually within 24 hours. Your televisit is private and 100% secure, and you can take all the time you want. So next time you need to see a doctor or therapist, call Team Wellness Online at 888-813-TEAM to make a virtual appointment, and we'll come to you.
Grief following a loss is a natural and normal and healthy expression of love lost for both adults and children. It's a little trickier with children because for adults, we have a lot of coping skills. We have a lot of understanding of grief and what it means. For children, especially kids who are younger, like under the age of 7 or 8, there's a lot of development that hasn't happened, so their understanding of death and dying is very different. So as helpers, we want to honor someone wherever they are in their grief. We do not want to judge them. There's no judging in grief. We want to respect them and be empathetic. Empathetic in the sense of, I'm going to sit next to you and support you in your grief. I'm not going to tell you what you should do. I'm not going to give you advice. I'm not going to interpret what's happening for you. I'm going to accompany you on your grief journey, support you, and allow you the space to grieve. SandCastles is a division of Henry Ford Hospice, and we are open to the community at large. We serve families with children between the ages of 3 and 18. We have ongoing bi-weekly grief support groups. We have a closed-ended 8-week program, and we do a summer camp every year, as well as additional opportunities for families to be part of our SandCastles community. We also do a whole lot of grief education because we want to create a more grief-sensitive society for kids. We've actually had a few kids who have been in our program as younger children who, when they reached an older age, say they were in our program as preschoolers, but when they reach middle school or high school, recognize that that grief is kind of coming back in a new way and they're not sure how to handle it, who've come back and joined for a little bit to now get their coping skills for now that 8th or 9th grader that they can take and acclimate into their world.
And so the love part, we talked about grief, the love part is remembering all the good times and all the joy, and that way it doesn't fade, it doesn't go away.
Yeah, so obviously, you know, grief happens because we love somebody so deeply, and that love for my mom is never going to change. I'm going to carry that with me for the rest of her life, and I want her legacy to be known. And so I even, you know, now have an 8-month-old daughter, and her middle name is Laura, just like my mom. And so she's going to know her grandma, and so her legacy will continue on even through, you know, my daughter.
That's amazing. And you mentioned earlier also about approaching things in an age-appropriate manner.
Yeah.
And so did your little sister have the same experience as you, or how was that different, or what was that experience?
Yeah, so obviously, you know, a 9 and a 12-year-old, I mean, though we're sisters, we grieved very differently, and not just like age-wise too. Like obviously she had, different activities in her group that she did, that, you know, her volunteers in her group, you know, worked with her on, but we also grieved very differently in the sense that, yeah, Jacqueline didn't, you know, talk about, you know, the death as much right away. She's, you know, working through it now as an adult, where I kind of, you know, wanted, you know, to talk about it. But as far as, you know, talking about death at different ages, yeah, there's different things that we, you know, teach to our volunteers that you want to talk to kids differently based on their age because of, you know, development, and talking about, you know, we don't say things like, you know, passed away or passed on. You want to use concrete terms like they, you know, died, or, you know, death and stuff like that. Their heart isn't beating, they're not breathing anymore. So it's important that, especially for the younger kiddos, we're using those concrete terms, and that it's, you know, clear what has happened.
That's interesting. I've only heard people say passed away when they're talking to kids, trying to be delicate and trying to be, you know, but that's not the best path.
No, in fact, because there's other words like in the healthcare field, they say like expired, or they, you know, went to heaven. And, you know, I know my dad said my mommy went to heaven. And so I was 12, I knew what heaven was. But for a younger kid, I've heard them say, well, how do I get there? Can I fly there? When can I see them again? I want to go to heaven too. And so it's important that you can still use, you know, the term heaven, but it's important that we use concrete terms when explaining death. And so, yeah, the euphemisms or the very abstract words can get really confusing for younger kids.
Do you get a chance to talk about your mom a lot with your sister?
Yeah, we do definitely talk about her, you know, as adults more. I feel like when we were younger, you know, you're always bickering and stuff like that. But yeah, we do talk about her a lot. You know, we each have pictures of her, you know, around, you know, I have pictures of her around my house. Jacqueline has pictures of her around her apartment. She's part of our story. You know, it's been, you know, some time since she died, but, you know, we, you know, still talk about our memories with her, what she might say about, you know, something we did today, or, you know, that type of stuff. I think that, you know, it's important to still talk about her, even if she isn't, you know, physically here with us anymore.
When I hear grief counselor or grief counseling, today, unfortunately, it's always an aftermath of some public tragic event. But not in that context, just at home. If somebody were diagnosed with an illness, let's say, is it okay to start preparing people for grief ahead of time, or is it only wait till the event has occurred?
Yeah, so there's this thing called anticipatory grief, and so it's something that we, you know, experience prior to a death, like if somebody has cancer, and it's important to, yeah, prepare children ahead of time if you know that a death may be occurring, that, you know, what are some of the things that they might be going through, like they, you know, may not be eating as much anymore, or talking as much, or getting up and playing with you as much anymore, and kind of maybe what are some of the experiences that they'll see. And also, you know, after the death, if a family chooses for that child to participate in the you know, funeral or celebration of life, there's different ways that a child can participate. Maybe it's putting together a photo board, picking out flowers, stuff like that. Of course, we're not mind readers and can't figure, you know, prepare for every little thing, but it's important to give those details to kids ahead of time, so you know, that they know they can come to you if they're in need of somebody to talk to.
I have a 9-year-old daughter and a 12-year-old daughter. And what would you say to a dad or a parent or a mom who had to be that rock now for the people that are grieving, and how do they take care of themselves as well?
Yeah, so I can't say enough about my dad. I mean, I know he's my dad, but I think he's the best human out there. He, yeah, took on the role very unexpectedly of raising, yeah, me and my sister on his own. He had support between family and, you know, babysitters and stuff like that, but he, you know, was still working full time and, yeah, trying to just like piece everything together. But he ultimately had to become mom and dad, which nobody gives you a handbook for. He didn't necessarily sign up for, but this was his life. And so I think it's important that, you know, if you have the support around you, that you say, what you need. Because I think that my dad was able to say, like, hey, I need somebody to watch the girls these days, or Mom, can you cook me a meal, or something like that. We did have a lot of support, in those ways. And I know it's hard that as a single parent to, do that form of self-care, but if you can, sneak it in, it's certainly important, because how are you going to, support your children and help them grieve if you, aren't taking care of yourself?
When it comes to grieving, when you used grief informed, right? Is it supposed to be, from a person that's trying to be helpful, is it supposed to be somber or more uplifting? Because, like, for me, I tend to shy away from sad events, funerals, stuff like that, because it's so sad. But if I am there, then I'm naturally, I think I'm a comedian, by the way. I'm so naturally upbeat, and I don't want to offend people who think it should be more somber. Do you guys address anything like that?
I think it's important to be yourself. I like it when people share memories about my mom, or just say, I'm thinking of you, stuff like that. I think it's, okay to, be more, you can be somber or uplifting or however you want to see it, but just be yourself and just let that person know that I'm here for you, no matter what, day or night. If you need somebody to chat to, I'm here for you.
And your journey has really come full circle, from dealing with the loss of your mom as a young age, and now you're an adult and you're helping other people through their journey. You're obviously very strong. You're here today, very brave. How did this happen for you? What are some of the things, or who would you say was a good influence for you to get you here?
Yeah, so there was a fundraiser for SandCastles, and there I had ran into one of the staff members with SandCastles, and we got to talking, and I was like, do you remember me? And she said yes, and she said that they were thinking about starting a Teen Buddy program, which is former SandCastles participants to come to camp. So I told her I was interested, and I ended up calling her the next day, and so that's kind of how I got back into SandCastles, going back as a Teen Buddy, being able to help kids that were in the same journey that I was, just a few years earlier. It was super rewarding to, be able to go to camp and, be with the kids and help them on their grief journey as well. It kind of healed me too, and, it's hard to talk about, but, being able to talk about it, for them, it's worth it.
And how does it feel working with children with so much emotional attachment to it and the trauma? Does it trigger anything that you have to be careful about?
I think that I kind of know my trigger points, right? Especially if there's a death anniversary coming up or my mom's birthday, I notice that in my body, I can get, I maybe feel anxious or, tense or tired, and that I notice that days leading up. And so it's important that I take care of myself physically, whether that's drinking lots of water or going on a walk, or mindful breathing. And then there are sometimes that there's things that I can't predict. Sometimes I hear a story that's, if I'm doing an intake that's very similar to mine, and it's important that, I take a breath after, the intake. Maybe I need to call somebody to debrief about it. And it's great why, we have a whole team at SandCastles of, wonderful coworkers that I'm able to talk to if I need as well. I know, people say well, why don't you just get over it? And it's not something you get over. Grief, is a journey, and it's cyclical. And so, some days I might be feeling sad, or other days I might be angry, or, other days I might just be happy remembering, the memories. But it's not something we, get over. And I know that especially, after, my mom died, something that wasn't helpful that somebody said to me is that, we grew up in the Catholic Church, and somebody said, well, did you know dying by suicide is a sin? And as a 12-year-old, is that, extremely beneficial to say? I was just like, okay, thank you. Because obviously I don't want to think that my mom committed a sin. So yeah, stuff like that, not super helpful, or saying, get over it, or, stop crying. It's important to provide safe space for children to be able to talk about it when they're ready, when they want to. And, if they don't, want to at the time, just let them know that I'm here if you ever need to talk.
And it's a process.
It's a process for sure. Yeah, it's something that it took me, many years to get to the point where I could, talk about her openly and, not completely break down. I will say, even after, deaths in recent years, it kind of still brings up, my mom, and I think about her, and I think she'd be proud of what I'm doing today.
My job was causing me so much stress.
I felt disconnected and frightened.
I felt so isolated.
I was beginning to feel trapped, depressed. I never expected that to happen to me.
We think nobody else feels the pain that we feel, but that is so untrue.
It's good to be able to talk about it.
I was able to seek help. I found it from Team Wellness.
It's a sense of freedom.
Team Wellness Center. You are not alone.
We appreciate you joining us today as we talked about the normal but very difficult and painful process of grieving. If you'd like to learn more about this or any other mental health issue, visit us on our website at myhealthymind.com, on Facebook at My Healthy Mind Show, or on X. We'll see you next week for another edition of My Healthy Mind. Let's talk about it. If you missed any of our past episodes, you can view them on YouTube. You'll find a complete list on our website. And as you follow us on Facebook and X, please feel free to comment and to suggest ideas for new shows.